Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another tutorial from sarikden.github.io. Today we'll be talking about responsive modals in JavaScript and CSS. This is plain JavaScript and CSS, and we are not going to be making use of any libraries. So if you're looking for a written version of this tutorial, follow the link in the description. Otherwise, stay tuned. So right now what we're looking at is a blank HTML page. I've already gone ahead and set up some stuff. Those are spoilers. I'm going to clear my console so nobody sees that. The first thing we're going to want to do is set up a little bit of markup for our modal. And we're going to be making use of these custom data attributes that you can define to be literally any key value pairs you want. They're very handy, and I use them quite a lot. So for the first one, we're giving it a data attribute of data open modal, and we're passing in an ID of a modal that we want to open with this button when it's clicked. We'll just put click me for the button. And then underneath that, we're going to actually define our button, or our modal, by giving it a data modal attribute, not open modal, but modal, and we'll call this one cool modal 1. So because the data open modal attribute, or the value of the data open modal attribute matches the value of the data modal in our system, it's going to open this modal when that button is clicked. We'll put an inner div inside there and a header. Inside the header, we'll throw a span for the title, and we'll call it cool modal 1. Then on the other side of that, we're going to put a button which just has a close link, so they can close the modal once they've opened it. And then underneath the header is where all the content for our modal will go. So we'll just put a paragraph and we'll say, hello from our modal. All right, cool. So now that we've got that, let's take a look at what it looks like. Definitely not looking like a modal yet, but let's change that. The next step we're going to implement is putting in some styling, some CSS. So, for that, I give this disclaimer every time, but this is generally something you would want to split into a separate file. But for the sake of simplicity, we're going to keep all our styles and our scripts and everything in one file just for the tutorial. Font size is 10 pixels. Font family can be sans serif. The root selector just selects the root of the document, be that the body or the root of, say, an SVG document or whatever. And we're setting the font size to 10 pixels so we can manipulate the rest of it using rem units. We're going to add a class to the body called noScroll, where when this class is applied, the overflow Y will be hidden. Oopsie. And now we're going to get into the styling of our modal. We're going to use the attribute selector and select anything with the attribute data modal. Give it position fixed, top 0, left 0, width 100%, height 100%. Some of this CSS that I'm implementing here is going to be a little bit stylistic. It's not all going to be just functionality, but you can, of course, tailor these properties to your liking to match that of your site or your app. 0, 0, 0, 0.75. So that'll be a slightly transparent black. We're going to give it a padding of 2 rem and a box sizing of border box. Display will be flex. flex direction will be column. We're going to align the items in the center and justify the content at the start. We're also going to add an overflow Y of scroll so that they can scroll within the modal once they've opened it. And now we're going to add a little bit of stuff for hiding and showing the modal and transitioning it all nicely so it has some nice animation effects. We're going to set the opacity to 0 initially and the visibility to hidden initially. This is a cool trick you can use with CSS where you can hide things but not completely remove them from the DOM so that you can then animate them in afterwards. It's a different way of doing display none, but the advantage here is that you can have it so that it's still there. It's technically it's in the DOM, but it's what's the word I'm looking for here? It's invisible so that it's invisible and it can be clicked through. That's what the visibility hidden gives us. And then from there you can transition on it like so. Opacity will set for 0.5 second transition. Visibility, oopsies. Am I spelling that right? Visibility will be 0.5 seconds as well. Now we're going to add a class to the data modal. So when the class open is added to it, we will set the opacity to 1 and the visibility to visible. And because we put that transition property on there, instead of just jumping from opacity 0, visibility hidden to 1 invisible, it'll smoothly transition it. So now at this point, we're going to want to add some styling on the inner div of the data modal. We can do that by selecting the direct, using the direct child selector and saying div. We'll say width is 100%, max width is 50 rem, padding 2 rem, box sizing, again, border box. Let's give it a border radius of 2 rem, a box shadow of 0, 0, 10 pixels, RGBA 0.5 this time, so it's a little bit of a more translucent black for the shadow. And we'll give it a background color of just straight white. Now in this case, what we're going to transition on, we're going to set the initial value of the transform property to be scale 0. Then we will transition on the transform property, and we'll do it in 0.5 seconds. All right, cool. Now we've just got a little bit more stylistic work to do on the header and the button and so on and so forth. So we'll do that. Data modal div header is going to be display flex direction row, align items center, justify content, space between. Now the data modal div header button, here's a selector for you, will be font size 1.25 rem, color is blue, border is 0, background color is transparent, and outline is none. So the outline property is a cool little feature that is the outline that exists around the property when it's clicked. And by setting it to none, we make it so that there isn't a little box that appears around our button when it's clicked. Data, modal, div, header, span. This is the element we designated as the title of our header. So we'll give it a font size of 2.5 rem just to make it a little bigger and stand out. And then last but not least, we'll specify the paragraph tags inside of our modal, and we'll give them a font size of 18 pixels, 1.8 rem, which is effectively the same thing as 18 pixels, but we're using rem units here. And that's it for our styling. So let's take a look again. And now, if all went well, all we should see is the Click Me button. Of course, it doesn't do anything yet, but that's because we need to move on to the next step, which is adding some JavaScript. This is where the magic really happens in this tutorial. So we're going to put this in a script tag. Again, sort of things you should put in a external script, but for the sake of simplicity, blah, blah, blah. I've said that about 1,000 times now, but I think it's important for people to know. Okay, so the first thing we're doing here is we're selecting all of the buttons that have the data modal, excuse me, the data open modal property. So any buttons that we've designated as buttons we want to open modals with once we've clicked. Do the same thing with the modals themselves. Excuse me. So now that we have all of our buttons in place, we have to create 2 loops. One of the loops is going to be the buttons that activate the modals, and the other loop is going to be the buttons inside the modals that close them. So we'll go for var b for button in modal buttons. We'll throw an if modal buttons b instance of element, or modal buttons b instance of HTML document. Now, the reason we're creating this conditional here is because there are certain things that are returned from the query selector all that are in the node list that aren't actually HTML elements. So we're throwing these in there just to make sure that we're only operating on HTML elements, not other things like numbers and blah, 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 whatever other stuff it returns for us. So now, if we've made it this far, we're going to say modal buttons b dot add event listener. We're going to add a click event, a function with an event argument. We're going to prevent default on that argument just in case you wanted to put this property on a link, for example, instead of a button. You wouldn't want it going to the link after it's trying to open the modal. You want it to just cancel whatever it was going to do, open the modal. Now we're saying target modal name equals e.target.get attribute data open modal. And we know that the target element is going to have that data open modal attribute because that is what we're selecting them by. So now that gives us the name of the target modal that this button is intending to open. So that's the next step, is we're going to specify the target modal by going document.query selector data modal equals, oopsies, got a lot of quotation marks on the go here, but it's all good. Target modal name. Close that off. And now we're going to, now that we have the target modal element, we're going to add to the class list the open class, for which we have all of our CSS defined already. And one last thing we're also going to do is we're going to get the document.body, and we're going to add a class to that. And that class is going to be no scroll. So they can't scroll the body, but they can scroll the modal. Let's check it out. Almost. No errors. Interesting. Let's take a look. I think I may have missed a line of CSS. Let's go back up here, shall we? Yes, we missed a line of CSS right here. So we want to say data modal div, but we want to say data modal dot open div, and we'll pass it a transform of scale 1. And that's what we're going to transition to. So let's try that again. And boom, we've got a cool modal opening up, and it looks real pretty. Hallelujah. Now the next thing we're going to do is make this close button work. And for that, we're going to need another loop for var m in modals. We're going to perform the same check that we did on the buttons for the modals, just to ensure that we're working on elements and not whatever other stuff is in the node list. Modals m instance of HTML document. So now what we're going to say is we're going to go modals m dot query selector header button, oopsies, button dot add event listener click function, pass in the event argument, just even though we're not going to use it in this case. Or sorry, actually I lied, yes we are. e.target dot, this is going to look a little janky, but parent node dot parent node dot parent node dot class list dot remove open. I'll explain that in just a sec. We're also going to add a body, or sorry, remove the body's no scroll class. So what is this, you might be asking? e.target.parentNode.parentNode.parentNode. Best way I can describe this is by looking at the HTML. So this is the button in question. This is the e.target in our case. So the parent node of e.target is header. The parent node of header is div, and the parent node of that div is the outer div, which is the one that has our open class and data modal attributes applied to it. So that's the reason we're selecting 3 parent nodes. We're going back 3 parent nodes, and we're removing the class off of this outer modal that we selected earlier. So let's save that and take a look at how it works. Click me, opens, and close. Didn't transition when it closed, but it did close. It's a little funny. Why didn't it transition? Is it transitioning and I'm just blind? No, I don't think it's transitioning. Well, minor bug. Might have to spend a little bit of time fixing that. Just looking over my post here to see if I missed any more CSS. Not quite sure why that's not transitioning out, but I'm gonna have to end the tutorial there, I think. So thank you for watching. Minus that one little glitch at the end, I think that was a successful run through of the how to create responsive modals in JavaScript and CSS. I'm gonna look into that a little bit further, and I will post any updates I have on the textual version of this blog post, just to see if I can figure out why the modal wasn't transitioning out. Anyways, hope you enjoyed this. As always, remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. And the text version can be found in the link below. Thanks. Have a good one, guys.